Because the entire video is at the back of Andres' head.
I saw that.
Wouldn't try to like tell you guys.
Alright, as long as we can
Okay.
hear it, it really doesn't matter.
That's a great follow-up. We will be beginning the lecture now. Laptops down, notes out, phones away. Today, we will be discussing Argumentation 201. People who will be lecturing, myself, Kyle, Richmond quarterfinalist in 2010. So, we have some credentials. To start off, we're going to do a brief recap of the Argument 101 lecture. And to help us, your friend, my friend, Mr. Ron Swanson. Yeah, we took this one.
Hello.
Goodbye.
Hello. You are here because you gave us money. Now we will give you ribs. Also, you will watch the debate. If you like the debate, you'll give us more money. That is all. Ron Swanson.
Yeah. Want to hear that one more time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello. You are here because you gave us money.
Oh, this one's
Now
thinking.
we will give you ribs. Also, you will watch the debate. If you like the debate, you'll give us more money. That is all. Ron Swanson.
Talking about the components of an argument, what are they?
Money rich debate.
Let's just talk about it theoretically and then ground it in Ron Swanson.
There were 3 of them. Marco?
Claim warrant impacts.
Okay, claim and warrant. Last one starts with D.
Data.
Okay. So, the video you just saw, what was one claim that Mr. Swanson had? Xander.
You are here because you gave us money.
No, you are here. That's a claim.
When you hear that word because, it's an explanation afterward, right? You know what does explanatory analysis develop into after a claim? We just went over these 3. Like not even 3 seconds ago. Warrant, right? Why is that claim true?
Xander?
Does that mean, so we will give you ribs is another claim? Or data?
That's more a warrant, I guess. Because you gave us money, we'll give you ribs. So the example isn't perfect. The data is just Ron Swanson. He's rule of law. He doesn't need data. He understands things. But to illustrate our point, claim you are here. Why? Or what's the reasoning? Warrant, because you gave us money. There's going to be a debate. You will watch it. If you like the debate, claim you will give us money. Warrant. So today we're going to talk about what the do's and don'ts in argumentation through illustrations of things that you would probably remember in movies that you've watched. To continue, what not to do. Anybody ever seen the movie Clueless?
Yeah.
It's a movie from the 90s.
John's going out with a high school boy. I like dogs. Clean them and feed them, just like these nervous creatures that jump and slobber all over
with me. Pro? Share? 2 minutes.
So, okay, like right now, for example, the Haitians need to come to America. But some people are all, what about the strain on our resources? And it's like, when I had this garden party for my father's birthday, right? I said RSVP because it was a sit-down dinner. But people came that like did not RSVP. So I was like totally bugging. I had to haul ass to the kitchen, redistribute the food, squish in extra place settings. But by the end of the day, it was like, the more the merrier. And so, if the government could just get to the kitchen, rearrange some things, we could start the party of the Haitians. And in conclusion, may I please remind you that it does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty.
Amber, reply.
Mr. Hall, how can I answer that? The topic is Haiti, and she's talking about some little party. Hello, it was his 50th birthday. Whatever. If she doesn't do the assignment, I can't do mine.
For you policy debaters, this is a good example of topicality, but we can talk about that later in our lab. So, what
That is the most definite.
did the affirmative do incorrectly? What are some things that she could have improved on? And remember, she was debating in front of a crowd of her peers, so she was also. Her speech was a little bit different. You're not debating. You're debating in front of a teacher, in front of a debate coach. But what are some things she did incorrectly, or some things that she could have improved on? Xander.
She could have not gone off on that gigantic tangent.
What did she get to? She started off with,
Haiti and ended up with parties, a Statue of Liberty, more the merrier.
yeah, started talking about RSVPs and the Statue of Liberty or something. She got off topic, and she wasn't able to hammer down her point.
The only word she used was a bad analogy.
It's a bad analogy, yeah. This is all that's come to mind when we were talking about like the fallacies in Argumentation 101. This is a pretty good example of that.
What about the language she was using?
Not
Primarily filler words. She was really thinking the sentence correctly.
Like totally. Like I completely get that. Totes and the goats. Your parents hate you using this language. Your teachers hate you using this language. You should. The judges hate you using this language. Do not talk like you are. Well, like I'm talking right now. Try to decrease your filler words. It is not something that comes naturally and will just start to happen off the cuff. It's something you have to actually practice because you have a social life outside of debates. You have a way of talking to your friends that is not the same way as you talking to a judge, you talking to a teacher. Welcome, Vivian. Please get some notes out. So it's important for you to remember that and respond accordingly.
There's one thing else she was doing wrong, driving me crazy. I was chewing gum.
Chewing gum. That's also a big one. This is something that you policy people probably can't do since you're trying to talk so fast. You might swallow your gum, and then
And then the other team wins.
I digress. Avoid slang. Stay on topic. You hit those ones on the dot.
And what was the impact that was articulated to her not being on topic? What did her opponent say they could not do?
Answer it.
Right. If teams cannot be prepared, because you're just going to go off on tangents of random things, it really inhibits the possibility of a clash, which is all the judges really want to see. Not just two people coming up and saying random things. It becomes very hard to evaluate.
So would she have won on topicality? The other girl? The other
I mean, if it was a vote of her peers, she won hands down. But if you looked at her teacher, he was just going like this the entire time. What's going on? Anybody ever seen the show Modern Family?
No substitute for experience. For example, I doubt my opponent is familiar with Town Ordinance 26-12B.
26-12 has to do with noise pollution, something, sir, that you are guilty of right now.
Oh, no, ladies and gentlemen,
No, they're a little too fuzzy and they're ugly ears.
Oh, she's a misnomer. She's ready for anything.
I do like to talk about the issues. Speaking of issues, your husband seems to have some.
Sorry, I'm not.
Well, I wouldn't want to bring it up since you asked. In February of last year, your husband won. Philip Dunphy was questioned at a local hotel.
So, what were some things that she did that Mrs. Dunphy did well in her debate against the local city councilman when she really just wanted to have some stop signs near her house? I watched this show. Xander.
Responded to the argument that she didn't know anything.
Responded to the argument that she didn't know anything with showing that she did know something. What's a better way of phrasing that? Can somebody think of that?
One up him.
That is true. She definitely did one up him. But what did he assume in Mrs. Dunphy? She didn't know the material. Very good. When you are debating and when you are giving argumentation, you need to have a general understanding of where your opponent is coming from. Do not make assumptions for you to look silly. He was like, you have no idea what you're talking about, and then she just came over and completely demolished him on the air pollution standards of that. And granted, the people that were cheering were her husband and her daughter, but they were at least a little bit of a crowd, and he looked very silly in terms of that. This happens for all speech events. Do not make a historical example unless you know the fact that, one, that historical example is true, two, that historical example is relevant, and three, just try to gauge your opponent and see if they watch the history. You know, it's hard to do, but sometimes you can tell when there's that student that just loves watching the History Channel. You can tell it in his speech when it starts off with, "It was a chilly day in 1776." Or he starts throwing in random illustrations about details in history. Why is that problematic if you do not do that? Mrs. Dunphy just clearly showed that. So, the bad stuff that Mrs. Dunphy did, I kind of hinted a little bit towards the end of that video before we stopped, but her opponent attacked her about something personal with her husband. And then she started going crazy, started waving her hands and things. It's a little bit inappropriate, so we won't show that video. But something to illustrate, do not get dragged down by personal issues. In policy debate, if they say, you have no idea what you're talking about, you did not cut any of this evidence, don't come up and be like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're probably using camp evidence. Can you read? No, because then the judge will just be like, listen, if they have kids or not, I don't like my own kids bickering. What makes you think I want to see four high school students bicker? Happens in all events. Xander.
The person's judging debates.
Right, but that debate can be, you can divorce your personal issues from that debate.
It's a debate over a particular topic.
Not over your personality and your personal
And what did
views.
we term this from Argumentation 101? Personal attacks.
Ad homs. Exactly.
Right? Because it never directly responds to the argument, but it only has the possibility of getting you.
In trouble. Only has the possibility of getting back to your teacher and for your teacher to be extremely upset that you're talking about attacking your opponents and how terrible of an opponent you are debating while you are probably in fact losing that debate. Xander.
If they do make a personal attack against you, couldn't you run abuse?
There are degrees of personal attacks.
Like not if they say like you.
There are degrees of personal attacks. If somebody makes makes a racist remark, is usually an example of when you can turn that into a voting issue. But if they are, and it depends on the judge. In most cases, that is a voting issue. But if it's just something like, you have no idea what you're talking about, you got this file from Planet Debates, a judge isn't going to be like, oh, why did you attack that student? I'm going to vote against you.
I mean, generally, most of these things are self-checked by the judge, right? It'll reflect in your speaker points, right? You're obviously not actually responding to arguments at this point. So it does the person who uses these types of attacks no good, right? And it'll be reflected in some way or form negatively.
And you have to make sure, like, you're probably thinking to yourself, I will never do this. This is something that isn't me. But you have to understand, you're debating, and you're presumably going to be debating in a local district, or you're going to be debating the same 20 to 25 teams for a majority of the year. You're going to start to be getting rivalries and losing those debates, winning those debates, and you're going to start getting angry at your opponents. I mean, I think Kyle, his freshman year, he went to a bunch of local tournaments that my school went to, and he debated one of our teams about 5 or 6 times. And a lot of times for both sides, since I think it ended up being 3-3, they just had to stop themselves from getting so angry at each other. A couple of years later, one of the debaters of my team still does not like Kyle's partner for some of the things his partner used to say. So it can also affect your relationships with the people that you are debating with, and it's a great community.
And you have to understand the beneficial nature of those, right? Sharing evidence, right? Going to people after a round is finished and asking what their opponents had run, what they won or lost on. All of these good intel that you could get, people aren't going to want to do if you get yourself a reputation of these sorts of things, right? So it can be very beneficial to form good relationships.
And if you do that, you create yourself a label to the judge. How many times when you were judging did you find that there was a team that would do these personal attacks and you would have that in the back of your head when you were judging that team? It happens. And
I didn't like it at all.
yeah, it probably affected the speaker points just going right into the debate.
They were attacking the other person's intelligence. It was the team that did the attacking that I perceived negatively. No matter how valid their points were or how they seemed to hack the debate.
And there's a way to intellectually beat your opponent. It's
Yes.
called debating.
Yes.
If you think you're smarter than your opponent, and if you think your opponent just doesn't have the same knowledge that you do, there's an avenue to do it. It's called debate. Who watches Glee?
For all you fans out there,
Well,
hot, wet, steamy dump about student government?
I do. And I think everyone in this room should too. First of all, student government isn't just a way for us to pad our college resumes. It's a way for us to take an active role in our own education. Study after study shows that an active student body is a successful student body.
Okay, moving on.
The student government is just the beginning. We need more school programs and a better qualified staff to support our teachers who are overworked and underpaid.
Oh,
And that's just the beginning. I want to talk about the cafeteria. As I believe we get it every year. These that are actually support our plan. And that's one of the many goals I promised to reach by the midway point of my first term as outlined in my 96-point Pierce Abrams roadmap to restore McKinley's future.
Merciful, sweet Jesus, thank you. Sam Evans, your response.
I wasn't really listening. Whatever Mark said, I agree with that.
Our next question is from
When you do that, that face right there, that's your partner. Come on! What? That's ridiculous. Okay, I don't know their names because I don't watch Glee, but what did the gentleman in the wheelchair do incorrectly? What are some things that he could have improved upon?
He didn't stop talking.
He didn't stop talking. There are speech limits for a reason. Everybody is given the same amount of time, whether it be policy, you're given an 8-minute constructive, a 5-minute rebuttal, and you can ask questions of your opponent for 3 minutes. We believe that that is sufficient to get your arguments done.
You will also hear often the phrase, don't beat a dead horse, right? Maybe know when you've lost an argument. Or maybe know when you've sufficiently covered something rather than re-explaining yourself 7 different ways.
Now, this seems like an example that won't apply to you, right? You think, well, I'm just going to stop my speech. It's okay, I'm never going to get to this point. I'm never going to have a judge as mean as that gym cheerleading coach. Pick your arguments. Make sure you have 2 or 3 solid arguments as opposed to just spewing out everything about what you believe in student governments, right? He had 96 points and he probably got through 47 of them in that speech right there. But his speech would have been more effective if he had talked about maybe the second part of his speech he talked about the cafeteria and how he wanted to have some changes in the cafeteria. If he had his speech had been centered to that, it might have been more effective.
This all goes to the distinction between depth and the breadth of arguments, you can say. While you may have pointed out multiple things, none of them became developed arguments that could be significantly weighted in the debate, rather than just saying as many things as you can in a short amount of time, rather than really focusing on what you could possibly point at.
Hey, Julian, what couch is that? Where are your notes? No response? You're like that kid in Glee.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about the second, his opponent. What were some things that he did correctly?
His opponent?
Yeah, his opponent, Devin.
He actually listened to the entire thing?
I don't think he was listening, because if he was listening, he might have refuted a claim here or there. So that might not be it.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities.
That he definitely did not do that. Does anybody else think of something that he did correctly? Monica.
Well, he indicated that he was annoyed and that the opponent was out of the conventional rules of debate by talking.
So he was good, but what was he lacking on that?
Well,
That's a claim. Everybody saw it. He spent, 15 minutes on a 3-minute question? What did he not do then? He said, you went over your time. Monica?
he wasn't that assertive, but at least he communicated that something was
He did point out that there was a violation of the time, but then he did not say why that was something that warranted a ballot, warranted not voting for him in the student election. It lacked an impact. It lacked significance. It was a trick question. He did everything wrong. But I hadn't even thought about that. So, good on you, Monica. What are some things he did incorrectly? Xander.
Conceded defeat.
He conceded. What's the point of debate if you concede all the time? Kind of defeats the purpose, right? It means that you're wasting your Saturday getting up earlier than you would ever logically imagine to what? Listen to one of your peers give a speech and then be like, wow, that was perfect. No further arguments. No! You came to engage in an intellectual debate where you're talking about various issues with people that are as interested in debate as you are. Defeats the purpose. Now, like in life, nothing is in black and white. There are areas of gray. You can make strategic concessions for arguments that you agree with, but you don't agree with the end result of it. Now, a video of what you should do. Oh, I didn't want to start.
Yes, that's Watson.
Mark Powell, life coach.
I'm sorry to see you go. I'm sorry to see you go. I've really come to think of you as a companion.
Hey, I don't suppose you'd want to move to Canada.
No. Don't suppose I would.
I don't get it. He's all gone. What did you do right?
What did we see here?
He showed respect to his opponent.
He did?
Or he just laughed. At first.
So in conclusion, he did not. He did not respect his opponent.
I don't think he can control that.
Monica?
I like his girlfriend. She's tricky.
Anybody else see some maybe good or bad things we have here?
He didn't make any arguments. He just kind of sorted into his copy and said, no, I don't think I would.
Yeah, this follows along sort of thing, same lines as before. It's just mocking an argument your opponent makes, right? Different from what Devin may think. He showed zero respect. You get yourself nowhere when you start off and you hear a particular argument your opponent makes and you just laugh it off. I don't even need to prepare answers for this. This is so dumb. Then what do you not have? Any answers, right? You have, and it is only in your benefit to respect every argument that your opponent makes and treat them as all equally intelligent, so you respond to them in the same fashion. It will only do you yourself a service.
Disservice.
It will do yourself a service
Oh,
to
yeah.
treat each of your opponent's argument equally and with respect, no matter how much you may personally disagree, because it will show in how many arguments you make against them. Devin.
I was But say he didn't have any, warrants or data for not liking the candidate. I don't want to say that.
Sure. Right. What happens when you just mock someone? Right? It never coalesces into an argument. There's no claim, warrant, data, there's nothing. Right? It's just laughter.
It also reduces your credibility
And why would you say that?
because it shows that you're not respectful of your opponent. If
Right.
you're not respectful of your opponent, why should the judge listen to your arguments?
I'm sure you've all heard this, whether in lecture or labs. It's called ethos, right? It's a credibility that you have when you're speaking. Right? Think about how that would characterize all of your arguments from now on, no matter how intelligent they are. If you have zero credibility in saying them, right? You can already see from Sam earlier saying in her head the whole time was what that team had done before. It's going to be in the back of the judge's head the whole time, and it will color every argument they make, no matter how good, and it just kind of gives judges an incentive to think for the other team necessarily, right? I'm not suggesting that judges are biased because of that, but it really makes things, it just makes things harder on themselves.
You're not doing yourselves any favor. Javon, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, was that supposed to be like the negotiation before or after round? Because they did like shake hands.
Well, this example isn't perfect. That was Ron Swanson's girlfriend. So he wasn't necessarily trying to win a ballot. There's no judge. He was trying to convince her logically to come and stay, but she threw an irrational argument out there in Canada. So the point remains backed in fact, backed in data. You need warrants. Otherwise, you'll upset your judge. Don't meet.
Unfortunately, the captain of the university debate team had a scheduling conflict. Yeah, so we had to bring someone else in to fill in for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the co-host of CNN's Crossfire, famed political consultant, the raging Cajun, Mr. James Carville. Thank you, Mr. Richard.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, sir.
Topic number 1. What is your position on the role of government in supporting innovation in the field of biotechnology?
Well, Dean, I'm glad that you asked that question.
I'd like to jump in and take that one, if you don't mind.
Have at it, boss.
Recent research has shown that empirical evidence of globalization of corporate innovation is very limited. And as a corollary, the market for technologies is shrinking. As a world leader, it's important for America to provide systematic research grants for our scientists. I believe strongly there will always be a need for us to have a well-articulated innovation policy with emphasis on human resource development. Thank you. That was interesting. Thank you very much. And your rebuttal, Mr. Carville.
We have no response. That was perfect.
Vivian, maybe you can tell us about one of these blackout moments and
We know you can talk about one. Thank you very much.
one of these moments where this sudden burst of knowledge comes. And then
just goes away.
Slips away.
Try to smoke it through their hands.
What are some do's and don'ts we think we can see from that debate there?
Xander.
Although he made a very good point, I think he probably didn't have to interrupt that guy.
Well,
Real strategy.
that's true, but this isn't a perfect example. They were just giving a very small debate, and I guess it was in the rules for one person to start over the other, but that is true. And that's something that can apply to all of you in all activities. Don't interrupt your opponent when they are starting a comment in cross-examination. It comes across as snarky, it comes across as rude, and the entire point of cross-examination is to get arguments out, to get them to concede points. And guess what you cannot do if you're interrupting them? Get them to concede points, get them to concede arguments.
That really ultimately ends up in two ways, right? The judge is sitting there in the back, and they have a different view, and they've just seen you ask questions and cut them off before they've said one word, right? That doesn't look good for you, and like Peter said, you don't ultimately get anything out of it, and it really only actually delays the time you have, because you know what they're going to keep trying to do? Keep trying to answer that original question you kept cutting them off from. So they're going to end up producing about 6 more questions and telling them to stop, and then it escalates. It's a whole big thing.
Because they're worried that they weren't allowed to answer that first question, so they're keep trying to go back to it because they think that the judge already has an answer about it. It ruins the flow of questions and gives you much more shallow answers from your opponent.
Shannon?
Raging Cajun?
James?
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, that's who he is. You don't know who he is? Okay. He's a pundit for usually CNN, and he is married to another political activist. She's very liberal and Democrat, and he's a very strong conservative. No, the other way around. She's very conservative. He's very liberal. You can imagine that marriage.
If you haven't heard him or seen any videos of him, he's generally, aside from this debate, a good example of very spirited.
Yeah.
That's what makes it funnier. He would never actually do this in real life.
I want to call him Burgundy. I know it's not from Burgundy though.
Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
Farrell.
Will Ferrell.
Okay. Will Ferrell makes a good argument, but he uses a lot of jargon and he's really wordy.
No facts and no details. Just lumpy stuff that he could have just made up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between just like a rehearsed memorization, right? You just got that sentence and you're just going to repeat it as fast as you can before you forget it, and like really understanding what you are reading and really being able to go over and explain certain things.
You have some tape on your arm. Julian, what did Kyle just say?
He said you gotta explain certain things and go over them.
Looks good. I'm gonna get you. Confidence, consistency.
How about not have random spurts of genius? Why don't we just be consistently making arguments?
Like a genius. I mean, you just get a random burst of.
A lot of people applauded Will Ferrell's speech because there was no dead air time. He got his arguments out, and he had the same confident voice the entire time. There was no pause. There was no uncertainty in his speech. So there was no point where the judges and the crowd was like, Does he know what he's talking about? Is there some uncertainty in his voice? Confidence and consistency is something that you need to have throughout the entirety of your speech. It's not something that you can just have for spurts. Otherwise, what does your opponent think when you are not consistent in your confidence? Maka.
Block dependent.
You're block dependent. What does it mean to be block dependent? Maka.
You rely too much on scripts. You can't read it. You think I know. You don't understand it. You don't know.
You cannot innovate. You have your speech, and then after that, who knows? I don't. What if you're debating somebody? Monica, if you're debating a team that is block dependent, what happens when they go off their script? What do you do when they go off their script?
Oh, I float it really carefully because I'll probably go one step too far and say something stupid, which you can kind of exploit in my speech. Or you can also ask them like basic questions and process and make them look bad. Or you can kind of make an innovative argument yourself, and that would force them to get off the blocks, and then that kind of puts them in a bad position.
D, all of the above. When you are not consistent and you are not confident, your opponent will remember that because one, you're breaking the tone of your speech, so they'll just note that. It'll be interesting for them. And two, they'll probably attack it because they'll see that you're not confident, and then they'll explore that argument. Oh, it sounds like they have no idea what they're talking about. Well, sorry, it is unfortunate to be them. I am now going to pummel them into the ground with this argument. Can anybody think of anything else that Will Ferrell did or that James Carville did not?
James Carville didn't really speak.
Yeah. He took a play from Glee's playbook and just completely agreed with his opponent. What's the point?
I mean, what if you do?
Completely agreed?
I mean, it's rare, but what if it
What
happens?
did Peter call that earlier? It's a concession, but of a particular type.
Stupid?
A strategic drop. It is not stupid to drop an argument here or there.
Remember, we are smart kids, and we understand that we are not going to win every argument. Right? There will be some things we are behind. We have to realize what ultimate impact do those have if we are losing certain arguments. And can we make up for it with the arguments that we are likely winning, because our opponent is also not likely winning every single argument. Yep.
Another thing was Will Ferrell just like stared down his opponent the entire time instead of looking at the other.
That's good. You definitely don't want to, in an actual debate, stare at your opponent the whole time. You don't want to be like asking questions because you are trying to not convince your opponent that they're incorrect. They're kind of set in their ways.
Generally, will you ever convince your opponent of anything you want? Generally? No. It's a rather simple answer, yeah.
No.
Maybe in their heart of hearts,
But one way or another, the judge will vote. Either affirmative or negative, either pro or con. There's a winner of that debate. So one way or another, the judge will be swayed. And that's your choice on whether you will attempt to engage it.
Christian, you had your hand up.
The Raging Cage seemed very snarky whenever he let Will Ferrell take control of the question, and his you go ahead kind of thing just came off as really arrogant.
Why do you think he did that?
Because he figured Will would never response. Compared to
Think about it in a wider range. Why would James Carville think that he is better than Will Ferrell? Credentials? Yeah. He has experience. He's been doing this for a living for who knows how many years. And Will Ferrell, if you've seen the movie, his life isn't going all that well at this point. He's back in college, hanging out, and he's going through a divorce, and he just doesn't even have his job anymore. So, do you think that happens in debate rounds?
Yes.
Usually more.
Not the divorce, obviously. But how often will you debate an opponent that has just, how often when you're a sophomore or you're a senior will you debate the opposite? You'll be a for you, those juniors, you've debated sophomores before, right?
You definitely can't say you go to a tournament, you walk in, you're like, oh, I really don't want to debate this team. Oh, this team is here. Oh no.
I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done
And sometimes, at a certain point, you're going to become that team. You're going to be the team that walks in that everybody's afraid of. And what, Xander, raise your hand please if you have a comment. And when you do that, you need to know that it's important to not come across as snarky. You know more than they do. They're dropping half of the arguments that you were saying. There's no reason for you to also have a snarky comment. Show it in the debates. Show it on the flow. Okay. Time for the videos is over. Now we're going to be talking about evaluating arguments. This evidence right here, these three terms are when you're evaluating an argument in a debate, and you have to think of them rapid fire. First, you need definitions of the term. What this means in a debate sense is you need to know the general background information of it. In Lincoln Douglas, it's a lot more explicit, where they actually have definitions and terms.
And these are instances where if you don't know some of the terms that are used frequently in their arguments, you should use that cross-ex time to figure these out, because if you don't understand the words they're using, your answer is going to be rather difficult.
Whose computer is filming this?
Marcos.
Andres, can you get the charger for that? It's about to die. In policy debate, this occurs all the time, but an example that illustrates this perfectly is when you are debating against a criticism and you have no idea. Andres, it's in the paragraph. And you have no idea what this particular philosophy is about. What's the best way to figure it out in a speech? If you don't know, if they have read the tag and are halfway through the card, what's the best way to figure out, have some basic understanding of what the criticism is? If somebody reads a piece of politics evidence that says immigration will pass, and you want to find the warrants, where do you look? A little bit louder.
In the card?
In the card! You look at the evidence to provide some understanding and to see what the terms are of that evidence. Second, look at the cause and effect relationships. In policy debate, you are defending on the affirmative and you are attacking on the negative. Those attacks or those arguments have a cause and effect relationship. It is the job of both sides, whether that be, if you're affirmative, is the job for you to get the logical fallacies out and say that there isn't a cause-effect relationship. And for the negative, It is your job to point out flaws in your affirmative speech. This can also apply to all the other events as well. There are points in your opponent's speech that they are confident in, and you need to get those out and make those arguments.
And this is a way that you can easily find holes in an opponent's arguments, because the argument should operate in a very linear fashion, right? There should be a link to something, and there should be an impact to that claim. If the ultimate effect of one of their arguments has no impact on anything in the debate, it's just an argument, they've made it, that's something you can notice, right? And if it doesn't operate in that sort of linear fashion, you can find out what parts they are missing in their sort of chain of events to get to some ultimate relevance in the debate.
Next, look at the stated value system. Are they consistent with yours? This is talking about, we talked about this a little bit, strategic concessions. When your value systems are the same, you can probably concede the impacts or an impact framing. So for instance, you have an affirmative that talks about rights, talks about the importance of deontology over utilitarianism. And they read a criticism that talks about our value system. You do not need to talk about the impact level or read. You can concede their evidence that talks about how in this debate values are the most important thing. Why? Because they are consistent with yours. Instead, you are now discussing which value system or which side gets to that value system in a better and more effective way. Now, when you're reading a piece of evidence, your opponent gives you a piece of evidence, they give you your speech. Here are some tips to what you should be thinking about when you are reading that piece of evidence, trying to find a flaw in it. Read the title of the card. Read the title of the evidence. If it is a piece of evidence that says that if they read a piece of evidence that says immigration is going to pass, and then the title says immigration is not likely, you think that evidence actually speaks to what the intent of the author is?
No.
No. And that's a great cross-section question to have. Do you honestly believe that immigration reform is going to pass when your own author in the title says not so much? Not going to happen? Next, check for the qualifications. Are there any? There is a difference between somebody writing an op-ed, and then there's a difference between a professor with a PhD. Julian, what is one of those differences?
A person with a PhD has a lot of training in the field.
And a person with an op-ed has
Their opinion.
their opinion. Now, sometimes it can be around the same level as somebody with a PhD.
But what is the distinction between submitting an article to a journal versus posting an op-ed?
Oh.
Christian?
Peer review.
Peer review. What does that mean?
That means other people would like to actually look at it, and it's a journal, like you can put up your page and have our policies and all that stuff.
Now, to the credit of op-eds, and you should have this defense because op-eds are much easier to find than journal articles, and is a resource that you're going to have. Op-eds do have to respond to editors. A newspaper is not going to put out an op-ed that has all of these inaccuracies. But the point to be made is that a peer-reviewed journal, you will submit that journal in, say, February, and then 5 or 10 professors will be looking at it over a period of 3 or 4 months, and then they'll send it back to you if it's insufficient. Whereas with an op-ed, they just don't have the same process, and they have the luxury to say, no thank you, and then grab the opinion of somebody else. Okay. Next, look at the date of the publication. This applies to all events. If you were talking, for instance, we were talking about military intelligence in Lincoln Douglas. If they read a piece of evidence that talks about the state of our military and our intelligence system before 9/11, what implications does that have? Any of you LD people?
The evidence is old, therefore inaccurate.
Yeah, it is old, inaccurate, and unreliable. Now, not in all instances, but we went through in terms of intelligence in this country, we went through a large, not renaissance, but a large upheaval in our intelligence. The Patriot Act was passed. Presidential war powers were increased after 9/11 for George Bush to go out and find the people that were responsible for the attacks. So, a piece of evidence that says that our intelligence system from the 90s is the most effective thing ever, and there's nothing wrong with it, doesn't assume changes in the literature and changes in the world. For policy debate, this most likely will happen on the uniqueness level, where they have a piece of evidence that is not consistent with what is actually happening in the world right now. Okay, finally, what do I know about this issue? You do not debate in a vacuum. Debate is not your, however much we enjoy debate, debate is not your life. You have a life outside of it. Your parents force you to go to school. Presumably, they've been forcing you to go to school for a while now. You have taken multiple classes and have an understanding of multiple issues. You should use that. You know about things, to use a very specific term. And you should engage that or interject it into a debate, policy debate. They make an argument about economic decline leading to nuclear war. What is something that you could probably attack in terms of what you know about history? Devin.
It's never been empirically proven.
Never been empirically proven. We had 2 bombs that dropped in World War II, but we're still here. More generally, about economic decline, it happened. You all lived it. It was 2008. Didn't live the Great Depression, but we know some people that do. Grandparents. But you lived in your parents endured the 2008 recession, and we still have all our countries. We still have all our cities. Nuclear war did not occur. You don't even need a piece of evidence for this. This is just using your knowledge and interjecting it into the debate. Now, there's one caveat. You need to also gauge your judge and see if they also have that same information. If you know a lot about French philosophy, don't talk about French philosophy like everybody knows French philosophy. They don't know French philosophy. We don't know French philosophy. So having that information is probably not going to get you very far, other than having a background information and being able to explain your argument with some authority. Interject issues that you know from your life that you feel that your judge would know. Now, this next advice is for when you are preparing an argument, when you are writing that piece of evidence, when you are preparing your speech and conducting research to find that great argument. It doesn't just, it's not just handed to you. You have to go out there and get it. So, you need to read actively. You should not read the entire article in its entirety when you're finding research. You should skim it. You should find 5 articles that you think, based off your initial impression, whether that be through the title, through the abstract, you should grab them for the initial impression. I think here are 5 or 4 articles that will support my claim. Once you have those 4 or 5 articles, and why do you think you should do that as opposed to just you find that piece of evidence and then you cut that piece of evidence right when you get it? Marco.
Find better evidence.
Find better evidence. Anybody else? Cross-check to make sure it's true, definitely. I'm thinking of, there's one thing I'm thinking of, Monica.
Did you take notes on the cards that you had? You can know it better and you can extrapolate it better in situations.
Yeah, you know your evidence better. There's one more point. Anybody think about it? By gathering 4 or 5 articles on an initial argument, you are writing your extensions as you are writing your file. This is, in debate, it would be the equivalent of getting your politics link and then having your extensions for the negative block. And the same can be held true for public forum and Lincoln Douglas as well. Now, to Monica's point, read the argument several more times. Get out the warrants. Read the evidence so that you can better explain it. Highlight key terms. This can be done through boxing it out or bolding when you are underlining, so that when you are in a debate, you know that you should put emphasis on this. Our piece of evidence has this comparative claim that is so good, I want everybody to know. How do you do that? By highlighting that particular sentence or that particular phrase and making sure that the judge knows. Alright, we are going to pull up 2 pieces of contradictory evidence. One claim will say that economic decline causes war. The other piece of evidence will suggest it doesn't. It is upon y'all to read these 2 pieces of evidence and see how you can compare and contrast them. Is one more qualified than the other? Is the date relevant? What is the language they're speaking? Is it hyperbolic? Should that undermine its credibility? Take a few minutes.
Can you just share it to us on Google Groups?
Young? If I forward you something, can you share it on the Google Groups?
There's a large glare in the center of the screen. Gun font powers are limited. Nothing.
We'll see as we have pieces of evidence. You're only reading aloud the underlined and then highlighted.
Is that better?
No, it's actually a little bit worse.
Yeah.
This means those of you
Does that make it better?
who cannot read that, pull up your laptops. Young Kwan's gonna drop a present in your email.
My laptop doesn't.
Do we need record that tomorrow? Do we have to record?
That's fine.
I'll just gotta use it. Thank you.
Alright. Alright, how much money do you have? And your making